The exact second my career died, the break room microwave dinged. I remember it because the smell of someone's reheated fish lunch drifted down the hall at the same time my boss, announced the new promotion. That's how it goes in this office. Big news always lands with the same grace as day-old leftovers. I had been next in line for years. Everyone said it. 8 years of cleaning up other people's disasters, of staying late while executives slipped out to their golf games, of quietly fixing mistakes before clients ever saw them. I was the one who trained the interns who leapfrogged into management, the one who could unlock any supply closet with a paperclip, the one who made sure this place didn't collapse under its own shiny incompetence. And then came the words. Congratulations, Dylan. Applause. Cheers. The scrape of chairs. Dylan, who still called the copier the printer, who spelled liaison wrong in a client proposal just last week, was beaming like he'd just cured cancer instead of remembering to show up before 10 a.m. for once. His tie was crooked. I'd fixed his Excel formulas yesterday. My smile didn't break, but inside, something did. As the room buzzed with celebration, he leaned over and whispered, "Hey, can you remind me how to pull those client reports? Gonna need them for my first one-on-one." I stared at him, then at my neatly tabbed binder, and felt it. 8 years of swallowing it down, of being indispensable, of nodding politely while they skipped me over again. It was gone. That patience, that meek compliance, it cracked. By the time I sat back at my cubicle under the hum of the fluorescent light, I wasn't thinking about a promotion anymore. I was thinking about strategy. Because if they wanted flashy incompetence on the throne, fine. I'd give them a kingdom of glass walls, and then make sure every single crack showed the first night after the announcement. I didn't cry. I didn't rant, didn't call a friend, didn't even bother pouring a glass of wine. I just went home, dropped my tote bag on the floor of my apartment, and cleared off my kitchen table. That table has seen things: Christmas cookies gone wrong, half-assembled IKEA instructions, and one unfortunate attempt at watercolor painting, but that night, it became my war room. I pulled out old spiral notebooks, a stack of sticky notes, and the company policy binder I'd borrowed from HR last year when nobody was looking. The cover was still bent from where it had been jammed behind a filing cabinet. 8 years in that office taught me one unshakable truth. Power doesn't live in the corner office. It lives in the footnotes, the compliance clauses, and the forgotten bullet points in mandatory training modules. I spread everything out like puzzle pieces. Employee handbook, meeting schedules, badge access logs I'd quietly printed when facilities left the server room unlocked. My own notes. Who came in late, who leaned on me to fix what, who covered their tracks by accidentally CC&G me. Years of invisible labor had given me an archive. They thought I was just an assistant. They didn't realize I'd been the historian. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I clicked my pen and started a list. Phase 1, information. Not sabotage, no, too obvious. I needed receipts. Patterns. Let Dylan stumble on his own incompetence, but with a spotlight I controlled. Phase 2, leverage. Not gossip, but documentation. Emails, timestamps, policy contradictions. The kind of details HR couldn't ignore once they were neatly arranged in black and white. Phase 3, exposure. Wait until the cracks widened, then push subtly, cleanly. The goal wasn't just to watch Dylan fall. The goal was to remind them all exactly who had been holding the place together while they applauded mediocrity. I leaned back, staring at the wall clock ticking past midnight. 8 years of being overlooked had trained me in patience. Revenge wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be methodical, boring on the surface, like an audit. The kind of thing only someone like me could pull off, because I knew where every binder, every loophole, every embarrassing little skeleton was filed. By the time I finally went to bed, my table was covered in paper stacks, neon sticky notes, and arrows scribbled between names. I had the start of a map. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. By Monday morning, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud, sloppy, obvious. What I carried into the office instead was colder, measured, deliberate. The cubicle farm looked the same as always, fluorescents humming, air vents rattling, someone already burning toast in the break room. Dylan strolled in late, balancing a latte like it was a newborn, and dropped into his chair across the aisle with a sigh loud enough for the whole row to hear. He was so swamped already. Perfect. I had a fresh notebook hidden beneath the stack of budget forms on my desk. Every page was dated, every entry neat. 8:42 a.m. Dylan arrival, 42 minutes late. 8:51 a.m. email sent to client with attachment missing. Nothing dramatic. Just facts, collected like stones. But facts alone weren't enough. They needed weight. So, when Dylan asked me to polish the draft of his first team update, I didn't just fix it. I turned on the document tracking. Every comma I corrected, every formatting change, every misspelled name, it was recorded with my initials in the margin. The final product looked clean, but the metadata told the truth. I'd practically rewritten it. Later, when he forgot about the vendor call entirely, I forwarded the voicemail to him, CCNG Mark. Hey Dylan, they tried to reach you directly. Thought you'd want the heads up. Innocent tone. Helpful assistant. But the timestamp did the work for me. By lunch, I'd planted 3 seeds and hadn't broken a sweat. The office, of course, kept spinning in its usual haze. The break room smelled of burnt popcorn, HR walked past with another tray of pastries nobody wanted, and Mark cornered me at the copier to ask if I'd just tweak the deck Dylan was supposed to present tomorrow. I smiled and said, of course. But this time, I made sure Dylan's name stayed plastered across the slides, while the version history quietly told a different story. At 5:15, most people bolted. I stayed, as always, under the hum of the exit sign and the lonely beep of the printer. I wasn't working late for them anymore. I was working late for me. By the time I left, my notebook had a dozen crisp entries, each one a nail waiting for the right hammer. Walking through the empty parking structure, I felt something I hadn't in years, control. By the second week of Dylan's glorious reign, he'd already become addicted to my help. Can you just check this deck real quick? How do I get the printer to collate again? Remind me, what's our client's CFO's name? Every request came with that same breezy grin, like we were co-conspirators in some grand enterprise instead of me quietly saving his career from imploding on day 3. I obliged, of course. Sweetly. Efficiently. And every single time, I made sure to keep the strings attached. When I updated his presentation slides, I left subtle markers in the version history. When I drafted the follow-up emails he forgot to send, I used the template from my account first, then forwarded it to him to copy-paste. My fingerprints were everywhere, but invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. The office smelled like burnt popcorn again, a constant background note to our little theater. Dylan strutted into meetings with my polished decks under his arm, cracking jokes, earning nods. Mark beamed at him like a proud father. I sat in the corner with my notepad, recording timestamps. Dylan spoke for 9 minutes, but never answered a single direct question. And here's the thing, when someone depends on you, really depends, they stop noticing how much they're leaning. They stop guarding their footing. By Thursday, Dylan had left his entire Outlook calendar open on his screen when he went to lunch. I walked past, paused just long enough, and memorized the overlap of meetings he'd already double-booked. Later, he messaged me in a panic. Can you shift that vendor call? Didn't realize I had a client check-in then. Oh, of course, I typed back, smiling. That night, at my kitchen table, I added another sticky note to the wall. Dependency equals leverage. It wasn't just about proving Dylan's incompetence. It was about weaving a net so tight that when he finally stumbled, there wouldn't be any way to pull himself free without dragging Mark down too. By the end of the week, I'd built myself a role no one else could see, Dylan's invisible shadow, the scaffolding under his paper crown. And scaffolding, when pulled away at the right time, makes everything collapse. The first time I realized Mark was just as vulnerable as Dylan, it was over a squeaky whiteboard marker. He was in the glass conference room, trying to explain quarterly projections to the regional VP. The marker screeched across the board, smudging more than writing, while he stumbled over numbers he clearly hadn't reviewed. I sat outside, taking notes, my expression neutral. But in my head, I was filing it away. Mark didn't know the details. He never did. That's why he needed me. For years, I'd been the quiet bridge between his grand pronouncements and the messy reality underneath. He'd say, finalize the budget forecast, and I'd untangle the Excel disaster. He'd promise, we'll have those reports on your desk tomorrow, and I'd stay until 9 p.m., making it happen. He thought that made him a leader. Really, it made him a parasite. Back at my cubicle, I pulled the HR policy binder from the bottom drawer. Section 14, Managerial Accountability. Any manager found consistently delegating core responsibilities without oversight could be subject to corrective review. I highlighted the line and slid the page back into place. Meanwhile, Dylan was still leaning on me for everything. That Friday, he actually asked if I could hop into his one-on-one with Mark to jot down the important bits because he was terrible with notes. I agreed, then sat quietly as the two of them danced around numbers neither could properly explain without my printouts. When it was over, I filed my notes, 2 versions. One sanitized copy for Dylan. One detailed record for me. The storage closet near the break room became my hideaway. It smelled like lemon cleaner and dust, and nobody ever bothered me there. That's where I kept a second binder of my own, tucked behind a stack of old toner cartridges. Dylan's missed deadlines. Mark's careless promises. Side by side, the pattern was becoming obvious. They weren't just incompetent. They were codependent. Mark needed Dylan to look like a rising star. Dylan needed Mark to shield him from scrutiny. And both of them needed me, the assistant in the shadows, to hold it all together. Dependency stacked on dependency, which meant when one fell, the other would too. I closed the binder, the faint snap of the rings echoing in the empty closet, and whispered to myself, checkmate, gentlemen. Just not yet. Every office has one spot that feels more like the guts of the building than a workspace. Ours was the server room, cold air blasting, wires dangling like tangled vines, the low mechanical hum that rattled in your ribs. IT had a lock on the door, but they were careless. All it took was standing nearby with a stack of printouts when one of them swiped in. I slipped through behind them like a shadow. Inside, I wasn't looking at servers. I was looking at power. On the wall, next to the cable nest, sat the badge access terminal. I'd seen it before, but never lingered. Every beep of a keycard, every late-night entry, every mysteriously early departure logged, timestamped, archived. Most people never thought about it. I did. I pulled my phone out just long enough to jot a note. Request monthly badge reports, facilities. Reason, cross-checking vendor access. Harmless on paper. Goldmine in reality. Because here's the thing about Dylan, he was late almost every day. Here's the thing about Mark, he often slipped out before 4 p.m., then sent end-of-day emails from his phone like he was still around. With badge logs, there'd be no debate. Hard evidence. Numbers don't stutter. The smell of dust and ozone clung to my jacket as I stepped back into the hall. The normal office chaos felt flimsy compared to the silence of that room. People thought the corner office held power. No, the power was hidden in data nobody bothered to check. That night, I made a second trip, this time to the maintenance closet. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old mop heads, but tucked behind the shelving I found another overlooked tool, binders of service logs. When the elevators had been down, when the air system had failed, when work orders were filed. Why did that matter? Because Mark had signed off on vendor delays more than once, and the paperwork said so. By the time I got home, I had dust on my sleeves and a grin I couldn't wipe off. I spread my finds across the kitchen table, policy notes, Dylan's dependency logs, and now potential hard evidence of time theft and mismanagement. The picture was getting clearer. They thought I was a secretary, a helper, a background character. But really, I was the one holding the fuse box and deciding when to flip the switch. The ambush came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was settling in with my coffee and my notebook. Emily? HR would like to see you. The intern's voice was too bright, too rehearsed. My stomach tightened, but I slid my chair back calmly, like this was just another errand. The HR office always smelled like paper and peppermint tea. I stepped in, and there sat Caroline from HR, smiling with that polished, neutral expression they must practice in a mirror. A manila folder lay on the desk between us. "Emily," she began. A concern was raised about documentation. Documentation. The word rang in my ears like an alarm. Apparently, someone had mentioned I was keeping files on colleagues. Notes, timestamps, observations. I felt my pulse in my throat. Dylan. It had to be Dylan. He must have caught wind of something, or maybe he'd seen me jotting in my notebook and panicked. Caroline tapped the folder. "We just want to clarify. There's no issue taking notes for your tasks, of course, but keeping extensive records on peers could be seen as inappropriate." I leaned forward, all innocent professionalism. "Oh, of course. I keep notes because I manage so many overlapping projects. It's my way of staying organized. Half the time I'm tracking which vendor delivered toner and which one forgot to send invoice copies." I chuckled lightly. Not exactly espionage material. Her smile didn't waver, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. She believed me, but she'd still been told to ask. When I left, the air in the hallway felt heavier. Someone had tipped them off. My neat, invisible plan wasn't invisible anymore. Back at my desk, I found Dylan leaning against the cubicle wall, sipping his latte. "Everything okay?" he asked, his grin too smug, too curious. I smiled back sweetly. "Fine. Just fine." But my pen pressed so hard into the page later that it nearly tore the paper. Complication logged. Someone suspects. HR is watching. That night, at the kitchen table, I shuffled my sticky notes and binders with care. The plan wasn't ruined, but the ground was shakier now. I had to be quieter. Smarter. One wrong move, and I'd look like the problem instead of the solution. They'd force me to adjust. Fine. I could adapt. But the thought gnawed at me as the clock ticked past midnight. Dylan had gotten lucky once. Would he get lucky again? The week after HR's little chat, I kept my head down. No conspicuous notes. No late-night binder shuffling in the office. Just quiet competence, like the Emily they all thought they knew. And then Dylan tripped into success. It happened on a Thursday morning during a client call. He was supposed to present updated projections, numbers I had painstakingly corrected the night before, hidden behind his shiny header slide. I expected him to stumble, maybe even choke. Instead, the client latched onto one chart, nodded vigorously, and announced they wanted to expand the contract. The room erupted in congratulations. Mark clapped him on the back like he'd just invented fire. Dylan beamed, wide-eyed, like even he couldn't believe what had just happened. I sat frozen with my notebook under my hand. My work, my formatting, my corrections, my attention to detail had handed him a golden ticket. By the afternoon, the office was buzzing. Dylan wasn't just energetic anymore. He was the wunderkind who'd landed a six-figure renewal. HR sent out a congratulatory email. Leadership started inviting him into meetings I used to prep quietly in the background. And the worst part? Success made him bold. "Guess all that hard work's paying off," he said, leaning against my cubicle with that same smug grin. "Glad you're on the team, Em. Couldn't do it without you." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste metal. That night, my kitchen table looked more like a battlefield than a workspace. Sticky notes scattered, binders half open, highlighters tossed in frustration. My careful scaffolding, my patient build, had just been overshadowed by sheer dumb luck. Dylan's win made him untouchable for now. But I also knew something else. People who stumble into power don't know how to hold it. Dylan had been propped up by me from the start. One lucky break didn't erase years of carelessness. If anything, it only meant his fall would be more spectacular when the cracks finally gave way. I just had to adjust my timeline. And wait. For the first time in weeks, I didn't stay late at the office. I let Dylan bask under the fluorescent glow of his sudden fame, surrounded by congratulations and backslaps. Instead, I went home, locked the door, and sat at my kitchen table in silence. The silence was thick. No printer hum, no clatter of keyboards, no fake cheerful "Happy Thursday" echoing from HR. Just me, the tick of the wall clock, and a battlefield of sticky notes and binders that suddenly looked less like weapons and more like clutter. I slumped in my chair. For a moment, the thought crept in, maybe I'd lost. Maybe Dylan's lucky break had shifted the ground too far in his favor. A promotion was one thing, but now he had a client win stamped with his name, an email blast from HR, and Mark's full-throated endorsement. But then I exhaled, long and slow, and the fog lifted. I wasn't beaten. I was impatient. Revenge isn't about winning every skirmish, it's about the long campaign. Dylan's victory had only inflated him, made him sloppy, more convinced of his own genius. And Mark, smug as ever, was doubling down on his golden boy, which meant they were about to make bigger promises than they could keep. I picked up a pen and started over. A fresh sheet of paper. No more scribbles, no scattered sticky notes. Just one word at the top of the page: audit. The company had one every year, like clockwork. External eyes sweeping over compliance, contracts, billing, time records. Most people dreaded it. I smiled. An audit wasn't gossip. It wasn't my word against theirs. It was facts, deadlines, documents. The very ground Dylan and Mark had been skating over with untied shoes. If I timed it right, if I placed the right information in the right hands, I wouldn't have to expose them at all. They'd expose themselves. I leaned back, letting the pen rest. The tick of the clock sounded steadier now, like an ally instead of an enemy. The scaffolding was still there. I just had to wait for gravity to do its work. And when it did, when the cracks widened and the spotlight swung back, no amount of lucky breaks would save them. The announcement came on a Monday morning, annual compliance review scheduled for next quarter. Most people groaned, muttered about pointless busy work, and went back to their email. I, however, smiled into my coffee. Finally, the stage was being built for me. All I had to do was furnish it. Audits are like scavenger hunts for adults. The auditors don't know what they're looking for exactly. They just know something is always wrong. My job was to make sure the right breadcrumbs were easy to find. It started small. In the server room, I left a neat trail of badge access reports filed under Facilities Request, Vendor Verification. Nothing suspicious. But highlighted ever so lightly were Dylan's late arrivals stacked against his calendar claims of early calls. A pattern waiting for curious eyes. Next, the service logs. I made sure copies of Mark's signature, greenlighting vendor delays, approving overtime he never supervised, were slipped into the miscellaneous folder for finance. Not buried, not obvious. Just accessible. And then the piece de resistance, a project folder Dylan had asked me to clean up for him. I left the original draft, untouched, in the shared drive, right next to the polished version he presented. The draft full of errors, half-finished charts, and copy-pasted nonsense. The version history told the truth, my fingerprints everywhere. If an auditor compared them, and they would, the conclusion was unavoidable. Dylan hadn't just been helped. He'd been propped up entirely. Meanwhile, in meetings, Dylan and Mark were drunk on momentum. They promised faster turnarounds, bigger savings, tighter projections. I took notes, as always. Every overreach, every timeline they couldn't possibly meet, documented in black ink. It wasn't sabotage. I didn't falsify a thing. I just stopped protecting them. By the end of the week, the scaffolding was creaking. Deadlines slipped. Clients grew restless. And the audit clock was ticking closer. At my desk, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words. Stage. Set. Waiting. The auditors arrived on a Wednesday. 2 of them, pressed suits, calm smiles, the kind of people who made everyone else suddenly self-conscious about their inbox. They camped in a glass-walled conference room with laptops and a stack of folders, and by noon the tension had spread like mildew. I didn't need to hover. The trail was already there. I just kept working at my desk, sipping burnt coffee, while little tremors rippled outward. The first came in the form of an email, requesting clarification on vendor authorizations signed by Mark Whitman. The subject line alone had him sweating through his shirt. He called me in, voice tight. Emily, can you, pull those files? There must be some mix-up. I nodded, pulled the exact files he'd signed, and slid them across the table. No mix-up. Just his signature, bold as day. By afternoon, it was Dylan's turn. The auditors wanted early drafts of the quarterly forecast deck. I watched from my cubicle as he scrambled through his folders, face pale. He hadn't even noticed the untouched version sitting neatly beside the polished one. When the auditors asked about the differences, he stammered something about collaborative editing. Collaborative, of course, meaning me. The office hum shifted into something sharper. People whispered near the break room. HR lingered near the conference room door. Even the interns picked up on it. Something was unraveling and fast. That evening, Mark tried to pull his usual exit, slipping out before 5, firing off an email from his phone to make it look like he was still at his desk. But the badge log request had already gone out. His name was in the list. Patterns forming, dots connecting. By Thursday, the cracks weren't just whispers. They were shouts, laughter behind hands, sudden silences when Dylan walked into the room. His lucky break glow had faded into panic sweat. I kept my notebook closed. I didn't need to add a word. Because the facade was collapsing all on its own, glass walls rattling as the truth pushed through. And I sat in the corner, silent and steady, the one who had always been invisible, watching as the spotlight finally swung to the stage I had built. By Friday morning, the office was holding its breath. The auditors hadn't said much, but their questions had been surgical. Every query left a bruise. Dylan's swagger was gone, his tie hung loose, his smile cracked. Mark barked orders louder than usual, desperate to look in control, but nobody bought it. I thought the ending would be quiet. I thought the auditors would file their report, and that would be that. But the final blow came faster and sharper than I expected. Emily, Caroline from HR, called across the floor, her voice carrying like a bell. Conference room. Now. Every head turned. My pulse kicked hard, but I stood calmly, smoothed my skirt, and walked under the fluorescent glare. Inside sat Caroline, the auditors, and, unexpectedly, the regional VP. Mark and Dylan were already there, pale and tense. A neat stack of papers lay on the table, a binder clipped shut. Emily, the VP, said, his voice level. You've been mentioned in these reports quite a bit. We wanted you here to clarify. For a moment, I thought the ground had opened beneath me. Had they turned my own plan against me? But then the VP flipped open the binder. Page after page of version histories, badge logs, vendor signatures, every piece of leverage I'd seeded was laid out. Not in my handwriting, not traced to my secret binders, but presented as evidence. The auditors had found it themselves. I kept my face neutral, but inside, something bloomed: relief, satisfaction, triumph. Mr. Whitman, one auditor said, tapping a page with Mark's signature, can you explain why these vendor delays were authorized without escalation? Mark sputtered, shifting in his seat. And Mr. Carter, the other auditor, continued, turning to Dylan, these early drafts bear no resemblance to the polished version submitted. Can you detail your contributions? Dylan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. And then, the unexpected twist, Mark turned on Dylan. You told me you had it under control. You said those numbers were yours. Dylan shot back, you're the one who signed off without checking. You made me present data I didn't even understand. Their voices rose, overlapping, panic and blame filling the glass box, while the VP watched with a look that could cut steel. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, the picture of calm. When Caroline finally looked at me, her expression softened. Emily, she asked, you've been supporting both of them, correct? Yes, I said evenly. I've always done my best to keep things on track. I let the silence stretch, just enough. But I can't make decisions for them. The VP leaned back, steepling his fingers. No, but it seems you've been the only one making sure this office didn't fall apart. The room went quiet. Mark's jaw worked soundlessly. Dylan stared at the table. By Monday, the fallout was official. Mark was transitioned to an advisory role. Dylan was reassigned to professional development training. HR spun it like a strategic shift. Everyone else knew it was a demotion. And me? My title finally changed. Not the one I'd begged for years ago, but better, operations coordinator. A recognition that I wasn't just holding pieces, I was running the board. That night, back at my kitchen table, I cleared away the sticky notes, closed the binders, and slid them into a box. The campaign was over. I hadn't screamed, hadn't sabotaged, hadn't broken a single rule. I just pulled back the curtain and let the truth do its work. Being underestimated had been my greatest weapon. They'd handed me the shadows, and I'd built a kingdom there. Now the spotlight was mine. And that, my friend, is how an indispensable assistant rewrote her own job description. Every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on the story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.